Good morning, everyone. All right. Right and wrong. Who knows who cares? I mean, that's Bennett's motto. Who knows who cares? That's what he says. That's my parenting strategy. Good morning. Well, we've been covering different prescriptive forms of ethics. We talked about deontology, from deon for duty, and we look for rules to follow or duties to follow. And then we switched over to letter D on your handout, the consequentialist or teleological ethics, and one in particular called utilitarianism. And that's basically consequentialist ethics or teleological, as you might imagine, always looks for the consequences. So the point is, the actions themselves are not inherently moral or immoral. Whether you actually murder, it's the consequence it has. And that's a very different way of understanding it. And so, if you're a consequentialist or teleologist, um, you're always looking for the one that leads to the best possible outcome. Always, always, always. Which also means that if you don't do something they think you should have done in order to save the most amount of people or whatever, you have a large negative responsibility. How could you let that happen? Is spoken by a true consequentialist. How could you let that happen? A deontologist would never say that. Basically, I'm being hyperbolic. They would never say that. They would never say, "How could you let what happen? I follow the rules. How could you let that happen?" And consequences. Well, that's what. Um, so the most well-known form of consequentialism is utilitarianism, and that, of course, is where you're trying to produce the most amount of good for the most amount of people, basically at all times. We talked about how it makes some sense um, to do that. It's intuitive. Yeah, you want to save a lot of people, so forth. But there's some difficulties with that because we said it's difficult or impossible to tell exactly what's going to happen in the future. No one knows exactly what it is. You can actually live it out. No one's going around all the time going, okay, every single action I ever make, how will this affect everybody? Um, we talked a good bit about it. Do the ends always justify the means? Okay. Then we caught up to this area of Christianity and utilitarianism. So 4 questions of anything I've covered so far on that. Any questions or comments about that? Any questions or comments about that? Well, in Christianity utilitarian, here's some very particular things you might think about. Christians have a prima facie, that is at face value obligation for utility, doing the most amount of good of the most amount of people, right? We want to help others and avoid hurting them. Sure. That's a typical response as Christians at face value, sure. But there might be other times when God's will overrides utility. So here's some strengths of utilitarianism from a Christian perspective. Well, it presupposes a world that's predictable to some degree because God has made things with cause and effect. So that's good. Yeah, makes sense. And there's the strength of that is that we can think, well, if this happens, this probably will happen. Yeah. It emphasizes the well-being of other humans, keeps us accountable not to be selfish because we're always thinking about what's best for Bonnie. That's my goal in life is, in general, does this help Bonnie or not help Bonnie? And that's good. Yeah, it's Christian. And, and of course, it emphasizes egalitarianism. We show no favoritism, rich, educated. We don't say, do I save one or save the 30? Well, what are the 30 like? Are they my enemies? Are they richer? Are they white? Are they my race that I prefer? Are they a political party? Utilitarian would say it doesn't matter, doesn't matter, doesn't matter. And so there's obviously in the Christian perspective, there's strengths to that, no doubt about it. Then there's some weaknesses. Uh, Sorry, will you go back to where it was? You have to go back to pastor study. Good morning, Hill Church. I'm so glad you're here this morning. If you are, you have to go back to pastor study. Thank you. And then click stuff. You came along. Are you clicking it? Nothing's happening? Nothing's happening. Please stand by. Okie dokie. A mixture of technical errors. Okay, so there's some weaknesses, utilitarian from a Christian perspective. Weaknesses, like, not everyone likes, I'm just kidding. Okay, weaknesses, human well-being is important, sure, but there are many other things that are just as important, some that are more important. For example, devotion to God, self-control, purity, forgiveness. There are things that matter to God beyond just whether or not other people flourish, you might say. Some would argue that. They would say there are things that are also important, not just the most amount of happiness for someone else. Remember, utility is at its core. It's a sense of making sure their well-being. Christians might say some other things matter more. Another weakness is it allows no limit to what people can do as long as it serves the betterment of the majority. Well, what if it served the majority to torture or to kill these 30 people so I can get all the resources? Well, it helps the best, helps the rest of the people. Well, we'd argue that's not good. Utilitarians fail to recognize that we have obligations to God as well to our fellow human creatures. God is the ultimate value, not humans. And so we forget that. So there's no limit ever as long as just other people are. And Christians will say that's not good because they're not the ultimate value in life. God is. And so we can't make all of our decisions just on whether or not Bonnie's happy, though I want to. And I tried. I did try. Christianity is more than just action and consequence. It includes character or virtue development, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So there's some weaknesses, but you have biblical examples of consequentialist ethics or a result. And there's tons of examples I've put on the screen here. I won't look all these up. You can if you want. In fact, toward the end of the study, we will go over some exact examples. So any time a result or consequence is given as a motivation, that's a kind of consequentialist ethic. Every single time. I'm going to pause there because we've come to the end of this second major one. Any question or comments about consequentialism in general, utilitarianism in particular? Anything at all? Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. So, right in Luke's gospel, Jesus gives the parable of the person the shepherd who leaves 99 to save the one. Right. He didn't sacrifice 10 to save the other 90. Right. Well, right. Right. So in that parable, it's an example of how much he cared so much about the well-being of the one. He doesn't want anyone not to be saved. I agree with that. He chases people. Right. Now, utilitarian might say that's right and that's good. That doesn't mean that's the form of ethics we should adopt. They might say, oh, that was just how Jesus chose to live his ministry. It doesn't mean that's how we're supposed to make all our ethical decisions. And then you might say, no, it is an example of how we should make our ethical decisions. Anybody else? I'm kidding, Juliella. Mm-hmm. That's right. So that is a perfect analogy of consequentialism. Oppenheimer. So the development of the atom bomb and then eventually a hydrogen bomb. That's exactly right. So the chief argument used by the United States government and ethicists was that it would save more people, though people would die, including civilians, which everyone concurs. Every normal person, certainly in America, concurred is bad or wrong. You say, yeah, but it saves potentially up to millions of other civilians and soldiers. So they calculated how many people they think would save and how much it did save by doing it. But that's exactly, it was a consequentialist. Deontologist says, no, you cannot do that because it violates several things. It violates what they would consider what's called the just war. You're supposed to, you warn them, we did warn them, from what I understand, that you're going to be, there'll be hell to pay. There's going to be really bad for you, but they're not, we have a nuclear bomb that will explode a city. As far as they weren't told, because the secret. So they weren't told. In just war theory should tell them exactly what's going to happen. We're going to invade you, basically. It's like what Israel did at Hamas. We're going to give you so many days to get all that people out. We're going to wait. That kind of stuff is a purely Judeo-Christian mindset. Other people don't give a rip about giving people a chance to get out. You want to kill everyone possible. So they would say some argued that it violated that. Others argue that it doesn't matter if it saved all these people. You did something inherently wrong by killing. And they would say not why, because you didn't kill just soldiers. And if you could bomb just a soldier fort, it might be more makes more sense. But all the civilians died. The consequences would say yes. Nevertheless, it still saved so many lives, like on a scale. That's exactly right. That was the argument for it. In general, based on historians I've read, that's right. That's right. So euthanasia makes the same kind of argument. That's right. So they would say, well, you're killing them. They say, well, I'm not you are murdering because you're planning on killing them. The difference is you don't have mens rea. You don't have ill intent. I'm not killing because I hate them, I'm mad or spite, or they're my enemy. I'm doing it in order to cause well-being. They're in pain. I can end the pain. Even temporarily, if I shove them full of morphine and they all of a sudden don't feel, but that level of morphine will kill them, will stop the heart. They'll say, yeah, but you did a good thing. And the deontologist would probably say, no, you didn't do a good thing because you deliberately killed a person. And they would say, we have the rule not to kill people outside of God sanctioning it. So deontologists said that's why they say can't do that. Others say, yes, you can, because the consequence of. That's right. Those are great examples. What another example? What are some other examples of? Because last time you brought these up, this is good. What else comes to mind? War, yes. Yeah, is war good? That's right. So a pacifist, usually a deontologist, a pacifist would say, based on their interpretation of Jesus' teaching, like Yoder, which I talked about several weeks ago, he interprets Jesus' instruction in Matthew 5 about loving your enemy and not turning the other cheek and not so forth, not giving vengeance as a rule not to ever enact any kind of physical violence. Therefore, that rule becomes more important than how many people you might save through war, including defend yourself, because you can't violate the rule. The consequences say we don't want to go to war per se, but if we go to war and defeat these people and kill a lot of them, it will save. They will torture all these people, and we to take down the tyrant. And they say it doesn't matter. You can't do that. The rule beats it. Consequences say no, it doesn't beat it. In fact, when you don't go to war, now you're culpable for all the torturing. They have a very high, remember, negative responsibility. How could you let that happen? All you had to do was drop the bomb. All you had to do was go to war. They would say, I didn't let anything happen. I followed the rules. I followed the duties. And that's more important based on their interpretation because Jesus said so. That's right. Those are good examples where people disagree very much. They're still trying to figure out what the right thing to do is, but it depends on which prescriptive ethic you choose. Well, you're a monster. No, you're a monster. No one's a monster. They're trying to figure out. That's right. And I will go to some more biblical examples later too. Yeah, those are good examples. And it goes down the list: stem cell research, or on and on it goes. Any other that's a good question or comments? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you saw the movie Bridge Too Far, where when people go to war, it's not their fault that people get drawn into it. They end up dying and hurting to what end? That's right. And a consequentialist would say, that's right, that's called collateral damage. And it is an unfortunate byproduct of war, which is necessary because it saves more people than it harms. So it took over people's homes, and they're going to say, that's right. They're going to say war is hell and bad things happen. To what end? A consequential. Well, the consequentialist, a Christian would say that depends on what kind of war. If the people who are starting the war do it just so they can exploit the resources of the region, it's an immoral war. The consequences are not worth it. It's immoral. Or I mean, almost every single, well, not every, but I mean, huge swaths of tribes all through Africa and the Middle East have been doing the tribalism, and Native America in America for centuries. They'd go and kill and slaughter each other and rape each other. Native Americans used to eat people in front of the other tribe they defeated, eat their loved ones in front of them. People did horrible, disgusting. They're like, oh, no, they're peaceful. No, they were not. and generally were not. And so not every war is righteous. And I think a consequentialist will say the same thing. It's not that every war is good, but if it is a quote just war, where a person they're doing it to fight back tyrants or to stop oppression, they would say it is. Yeah, biblically speaking, yeah, there are times that there's supposed commandments in the Bible where they're told to go to war, and they say if you don't want to go, you can leave. Yeah, they're same thing with the Nazis, by the way. There's a common belief that well, if the soldiers said no, they would have been killed. There's not a single instance, any time ever, that a person was imprisoned or hurt if they could have conscientious refusal to do that. And I've seen so many documentaries on this. They've interviewed tons of Germans. They're like, well, yeah, I was at Auschwitz. I was blah blah blah. Like, yeah, I saw it. I was there. Yeah, I was a guard. I was proud to be there. I was. There's no sense of, oh, I didn't know what to do. I hated it. And that's any war. Yeah, in Israel, supposedly that. Yeah, and I say supposedly because that's I could talk afterwards about that, but that's right. But they would say, you said to what end? They would say to the end of God's judgment. That is the end of it. That's the reason why it's occurring. Yeah. So if that happened the way it's described, you'd have to meet an Israeli soldier who's been commanded to go kill all these people. They might go, I don't want to do this. A deontologist would say, you've been commanded by God. Now you have the moral duty to go do it. It's not true. Well, it might be. Afterwards, we can talk if you want. It's problematic, not because God doesn't have the moral right to do it. Sure, He does. He's God and He has the right over all human life, but it is problematic. No, that's good. Good question. Good comments. Good stuff. Anybody else? Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, in the movie Imitation Game. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The Enigma. Yep. Right. So I gave that analogy earlier. Actually, that is good. That's right. So when in the movie The Imitation Game, where they break the Enigma code, the machine, and he realized now we can go. They realize where all the warships are, and some American caravans and transports are about to. They're going to go down because the Germans are sending their submarines, and they can see that on the map when they do the coordinates. And like, we got to tell them right now they're going to go down, and they had to say no. It was a big scene where the main character, we can't do this because if we do that, the Germans will know we broke the code, which then we have to start all over again because they'll just change the machine. In fact, we've got to be extremely strategic with this. They can only use the information certain times to save certain people so the Germans don't realize. That's right. So a deontologist might argue, and they would say that we have the moral duty, what we call the preservation of human life. We have the moral duty to preserve human life, and we know that we can preserve human life. Now we got to say no. A consequential say no. We have to preserve the most amount of lives, and that's right. Utilitarian says the most amount of good for the most amount of people, and to do that, you have to not save them right now. Would Spider-Man be a deontologist? I don't say more. I've never thought about that exact question. Okay, yeah, those are the great power have great responsibility. Yeah, Uncle Ben said that. Yeah, that's right. That's right. They would say, and I have to follow that rule. So therefore, I have the responsibility to save everyone in front of me. That's right. and but consequentialists might say have the great response. With great responsibility comes great power comes great. A consequentialist will say I have the great responsibility to save the most amount of people. But a deontologist, again, you can find this abhorrent because utilitarian Spider might say, um, well, here's an example. Here's an example where this is classic. It's the stereotypical. This probably will happen when AI takes over in every single book and movie. The first thing they do when they come awareness basically is realize that there is one great enemy that faces humankind, and it's humans. So the AI attacks humans. It's Terminator. It's the I don't know, X-Men. It's the Marvel universe. That's the first thing. The point is right. So now it's time to kill all the cities. They knock out, they send nukes and kill all the main, and then of course robots take over because humans are the greatest threat to themselves. That's consequentialism. So to save the most amount of people, or what's his name? Who's the main bad guy in the Marvel? Thanos, right? All the humans, I mean, all creatures around the universe, they're being overpopulated and can't eat, so I'm going to kill half of them. And he's like, I can finally rest. I did it. I saved the universe by killing 50% of them. That's pure consequentialism. So a deontologist, that's all the superheroes in the movies. You can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. He's making a consequentialist argument the whole time. Like, and that's why they deliberately make him come across as someone who's not a villain. He's convinced he's doing the right thing. Like, y'all don't get it. I mean, it's unfortunate you have to die, but you're getting in the way of the greater good. It's the greater good. It's the greater good. You can't do that. You can't kill these people. Sure, I can. So we see this all the time, but deontology, that's just horrible. It's reprehensible. You can't go around killing everybody. It's a rule. You can't go kill people, and you can't do that. And, yeah, I can. Sure, I can. And it's a good thing that I'm saving all these people by killing half of them. You'll thank me. He even said, you'll thank me later. You'll see. He's being a consistent consequentialist. That's right. Hitler made the same kind of argument against the Jews. They're not people, they're vermin, and they're the downfall of Europe. And so once we kill them all, you'll see that Germany will no longer have any problems, and Europe will have once we get the pure race, they'll appreciate this. When they started Planned Parenthood, if we can just get rid of all the black people, they'll see that culture will be improved and the human race will be much better. They really argued this. It's a consequential. Now these are bad examples. You're like, well, consequentials sound like the devil. These are examples of arguments that can lead to things that deontologists would say is morally reprehensible. But they're going to flip it around and say, you're morally reprehensible. Why would you not want to save the race? Anyway, I'll go ahead. Any questions or comments about that? Anything else? Are the Nazis the one who decided that the Jews were vermin? No, man. Anti-Semitism traces go back for a long time, really the medieval times, for a long time. But the Germans sure made it well known. They literally changed all the children's curriculum and youth curriculum and commercials and everything they did. They changed radio. Everything was changed to make sure Jews were always the villains. All the pictures changed them to look. I've seen so many documentaries. They look really ugly. They're disgusting. They're always trying to steal things. They could work magic. They could shape shift. That's back to the old Islamic thing. They still believe that. They teach that in certain hadith that the Jews can they can change shapes. Muhammad said that. He said they can be rats or they can be scorpions. And he had tests of how to decide whether that rodent in front of you was a Jew, depending on what kind of milk it drank because of the kosher. So if it drank goat milk, it was a Jew or not a Jew, but bovine milk, it wasn't a Jew. So he had tests of how to decide if the rodent in front of you was a Jew. They still teach this today. All through the Muslim world, they teach this all the time. Kindergartners are taught early on, I can't remember the Arabic, they'll say, and who killed the blessed prophet? And they'll say, the Jews! Allah curse them. Because that's the legend, is that a Jew poisoned Muhammad. And they'll say, and who put a magic trick, who cast a spell or something like that? And they'll say, the Jew. And kindergartners chant this. It's all through the cartoons. And so the Nazis did the same thing all through Germany. All through Germany. So Hitler's youth, they were trained from childhood. And that's how it worked. You get a whole generation of people, about 10 years. And as soon as they can join Hitler's youth, a lot of the kids, I've seen that a lot of the kids lied about their age so they could join. They were so proud, and it was just incessantly. They were to blame for everything. Jews. And then they get old enough, 16, 17, 18 years old, then they can fly jets, drive tanks, and before you have a whole army of people who basically despise Not just them, not just soldiers, but whole cultures of people who people joined the bandwagon very quickly because it wasn't just the Nazis, it was a widespread kind of the view that to this day anti-Semitism is alive and well. They just took advantage of it very, very well. I mean, it's disgusting and stupid, but good question. Yeah, anything else? Speaking of Nazis, let's talk about virtue ethics. I'm kidding, that's not about Nazis. That's okay, so there we go. Virtue ethics. This is the third major kind of prescriptive ethics. So we talked about deontology, and then consequentialism. Here is virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is an approach to ethics that emphasizes moral character over rules or consequences as the key element of ethical thinking. So rather than focusing primarily on what one should do, as in deontological ethics, or the results of an action, as in consequentialism, virtue ethics centers on what kind of person one should be. What kind of person one should be. Virtue ethics concentrates on cultivating good character traits or virtues and avoiding bad ones we call vices. That's the goal. You want to build up good character traits, virtues, and you want to get rid of all vices. Moreover, to be a truly good person, it's not enough that one simply do the right things. One must also feel the right way and do the right things with the right motives and intentions. One must possess a certain kind of character. So they always ask the question, this is the leading question, what kind of person are you going to be? And you might say, and whatever you are, whatever you be, the natural fruit's going to come out of your character, like Jesus says in Matthew 12, right? You'll know a tree by its fruit. You naturally produce, that is, your behavior naturally flows out what's in your heart and your mind. And that's what their chief goal is, building up moral character, moral virtues. So what is virtue? I'm glad you asked. Virtue, from the Greek word arete, refers not just to moral virtue, but also to excellence or goodness in any field or capacity. Like Plato and Aristotle, anything that was fully excellent, it had virtue. But eventually got narrowed down to just character in the side of a person. So technically speaking, virtue is excellence, but it's a type of habit. It's a habit as an inclination or disposition to act, think, or feel in a certain way. And habits are tendencies or patterns of behavior or thought. They're tendencies or patterns. Therefore, a virtue is a habit to act, think, or feel in a way that disposes a person to act in ways consistent with moral reason. One more time. So a virtue is a habit to act, think, or feel in a way that disposes a person to act in ways consistent with moral reason. So I have the habit of, they would say, of being honest. I have the habit of being generous, the habit of caring for others more than myself, the habit of being selfless. And that is a virtue. A virtue is a ingrained, habitual, and inchoate desire to act, think, and feel in a way that's constantly leading towards virtuous behavior. You might say just comes naturally. That's the goal, is to develop my character such that virtuous and have a virtuous character, so that by default I do naturally virtuous things, just like Jack does on a daily basis over here. Just he wakes up living the dream life of virtue. That's the whole goal of today's study. He said amen. So here's some elements of virtue theory. Here's some elements of them. Well, virtue ethics focuses on the whole person, not just particular actions. So I'm going to emphasize this to make sure you get this. Instead of discussing good and bad acts, virtue theorists discuss what makes a good or bad person, a person of virtue or vice. So moral formation in a person's character is the goal. Not just how many people you save, not based on the rule as it were, but you, the person. Is it forming you? Well, what constitutes good depends on the person's, you might say, cosmology, that is the worldview, and the place in that worldview. If you believe in the Christian narrative, then certain virtues will exist in your value system that non-Christians will not believe are virtuous. Christians believe in humility. Non-Christians do not believe that's a virtue. Humility is not it's a Christian virtue. Almost uniquely. Almost uniquely. I've heard this from Jewish thinkers I like. They're like, we don't believe in humility. That doesn't make sense. The Christian go, yeah, it does, because of Jesus. But that's the humble thing. Self-sacrifice. Some other religions believe that, but that is a Christian. It's not uniquely Christian, but it is Christian. Self-sacrifice. Being a service-minded, nonviolence. At least interpersonal nonviolence. So we believe those are good things, good virtues, and we're trying to shape our character to be like that. So that's the main thing, that they focus on the whole person, for sure, inside the person. Letter B is virtue ethics places actions within the history of the person. So virtue ethicists believe deontologists, rule people, and utilitarians, consequences of the people of the group, make the human condition absent from moral questions. Should one go to war, or should one have an abortion? Look at the rules or look at the consequences. But they're going to, virtue ethicists are going to say, listen, humans make moral decisions, and humans have a type of character and a long history of decision making. So you need to look at the person, not just rules and not just consequences. For example, abortions for non-Roman Catholics and for Roman Catholics are very, very different. And the rules and consequences, but you need to look at the long history of that. And inside the person, does it shape you to be the kind of person who does this or not do this abortion? I see page 37, don't worry about that. Eating meat for vegetarians or non-vegetarians. There's a long history of why they do this and why it may form a person a certain way. You have different reasons for that. When you do something good, we might say, I can't imagine doing anything else. I can imagine. I've always done that. That's what a virtue is. It's a habit. I want to form a long time. Wow, you're so kind to those people. Well, thank you. I've been in this for years. I've been forming this. I've been working on my virtuous character. It's all my history. I've been in this for a long time. And if it's not your history, you got to shape it to where it becomes part of your history. So again, virtuous persons are virtuous because they demonstrate a pattern of certain virtuous habits, not just a few instances. Being kind or honest. Good for you. You were nice today. I'm a virtuous person. They would say, no, you're not. Good for you that you were kind, but that's not your character yet. They're trying to build that up over the long haul. Long, long time. So it's in the person, not, and of course, there's a history of that. And then for virtue ethicists, actions both reflect who we are and determine who we are. So it works both ways. Our character is reflected in our actions determine our character. And it does. So you'll see what a person, back to, again, you'll see what kind of tree they are by the fruit it produces. You'll see. I mean, and it works both ways. The more you do a virtuous thing, the more it shapes your character. The more that's in your character, the more likely you are to do it. They're intertwined. Virtue ethics focus on motivation and intention. So they're not just perform the right actions, a virtuous person. She does what's right with the right motive or intention. So that's very important. Very important. So here's some questions that people would ask of the virtue ethicists. They would say this. Well, deontologists and utilitarians argue that we should focus on action because actions are within our control. Are virtues like humility or courage always within our control as a desire? They would say if it's not, then you're wasting your time. Virtue ethicists might say, well, sure it is, and here's why. But those are questions, and that's why they would argue against it. You can't control that. Why even trying to make sure you build up your character? You can't control that. Another question is it necessary to have the right motive for an act to be moral? What if I give money to a homeless shelter so that I get praise in the newspaper? Consequentialists will say that's a good thing. A virtue ethicist will say, no, it is not. Say, but it's still, is it bad to give the money? A virtue ethicist might say, yes, because you did it for the wrong reasons. It was bad to give money. There wasn't a rule involved. It just, you did it for more praise, and you got it. You did it for your ego, and that was a bad reason. That was immoral to give the money. But again, others would say, no. A deontologist might say, I have the rule to help. And the consequence, yeah, but it helped people. A virtue said, no, that was bad. And they're going to come back and say, it wasn't bad, was it? To give that money to the orphanage, it helped the kids. Yeah, but you did it to get a plaque. So, isn't it good the kids have clothes? No, because you did it for the wrong reasons. They go back and forth. Another question is, what if we do something out of several motives or desires, especially they're mixed morally? For example, I wanted to help my homeless people, and I wanted to get praise for being a generous person. Like both were true. And they would say, I don't know what to do with all that. That's some of the questions they would ask back. Let me pause here for a second. Any questions or comments about that? Is there a difference between a habit and a virtue? Well, technically, yes, because a virtue is a habit that leans toward the moral good. So I might have the habit of going to the restroom in the morning, but that's not a virtue. I might have the habit of drinking before I eat my food, that's water, but that's not a virtue. So virtuous is a morally good habit. Does that make sense? And then they say, what's good? And that's what the person says, well, it depends on your moral values. You have to get those from somewhere. But once I decide they're moral goods, I want those things in my character. And when I do that over and over and over, that's a virtue. So it's a good habit. Morally good habit is what I mean. Back to my example of, well, what's good? A Muslim might think things are morally good and have a virtuous character, and a Christian go, some of that is, otherwise it's not. Yes, it is. Well, we disagree a different worldview. Or a Jew or a non-Christian might say, I'm developing my virtuous character, which I'll give you some examples in a second. And they did. They did. I mean, pagans said it for a long time. The Christians come along and say, well, we have different moral goods, which means we have different virtues. Sometimes they overlap. Sometimes they do. So various questions. So I have this on your handout, I think, so that you don't have to write on type all this out. So virtue and Jesus' character. I originally had something typed differently, and I originally, when I first do my notes, a long time I taught this, I called it sanctification, and I dropped that word because that's not in the Bible, and there's a translation for that in the Bible, but I still will tell you that's not what it means. Sanctification in the church all my life means like growing up to be more like Jesus, getting more and more holy, and both are wrong. That's not what sanctification means, and holy is not a moral category. It's a common misconception. It's just not that. And so, if you want, I'll explain more, but that's not what it means. Holy means to be co-identified with God. It's not a moral character. It is not about moral character, and everybody teaches that wrong. That's just basic Hebrew and Greek. It's not what it means. So when I talk about virtue, I mean something along the lines of, what does it mean to have virtuous character? It means the process by which a Christian participates in Jesus' character, which is characterized by certain virtues. So when I say Christians, if you were to say this, Christians are developing, they're going to be a virtue ethicist. I'm going to say, where does your good come from? We're going to say basically it comes from Jesus and his Holy Spirit that gives us a life to be like him. Not like Muhammad, not like Kung Fu Tse or Confucius, not like the president, but through Jesus. And so then a virtue ethicist will go to say what Jesus said or did, or the early church, and say, here are all the things Christians should do, or rather should be like. And so here's an example I put on the screen in your handout of various virtues that a typical Christian virtue ethicist would say. These are the kind of habits, Bonnie, you ought to have all the time. So humility, right? Humility or meekness, sometimes translated that. And if you want, we can unpack all these if you want, which is fine. Humility is the capacity to think of others, to treat them, to treat their needs, to treat them as if you are a servant. Of course, forgiveness. I give you all the Bible verses there on your handout. Jesus said you had to forgive. It's all through patience is a Christian virtue. People would argue having hope is a Christian virtue, all through the New Testament. Having courage or even having faith, being generous, sympathy or compassion for people. Which, a little footnote, I hear this all the time in counseling. I don't want people's pity. Then you just ruled out a Christian virtue. I've said it many times, and you just ruled out a chief Christian virtue. We are commanded to give pity, which is the same synonymous with compassion or sympathy. That's what it means. But when you struggle with shame or pride, you don't like compassion. So you're choking yourself off from receiving a very, very important Christian virtue. Love is a Christian virtue. Honesty, gentleness, kindness, self-control, joy. We got a laundry list of Jesus in the early church. So these are various Christian, as a virtue ethicist would argue, these are the kind of habits that a Christian virtue ethicist would say you're supposed to be inculcating these things. You're supposed to live in such a way that by default you're the person who's showing this fruit. How do you do that? You have to be gentle to get more gentle. And gentleness starts, and I've been working on that for years. I have that one in particular, gentleness. Kindness and self-control and joy. The more you do it, the more you do it. And so a virtue ethicist is going to ask the question, well, if someone says, what's the right thing to do? They're going to say, which action or behavior is the one that inculcates my character to be like this? That's the one I know is the right thing to do. Go ahead, Julia. That's good. She said, I think of joy more as emotion than a virtue. That's right. I actually agree. I think joy chiefly is an emotional state. But certain virtue ethicists will say, no, it's not. It's a disposition of gratitude. And I say, okay, that's okay. I don't think that's what the Greek means, but that's fine. You could say that. A person could say that. Yeah, it comes from something else, right? I would say I can't control the joy. I can choose to be grateful, though, and that's different. But they will say, well, sure, great. But that's part of that control. That's why the question would be, but why are you focusing on things you can't control? A virtue ethicist might argue I can control joy. I mean, I've met people, many people in the church. Oh my goodness, Christians ought to be the most happy, joyful. Oh man, if it gets like we can control that. And okay. I mean, I guess in my world that's just not true. Not to mention counseling for almost over 20 years, I've met many people who love Jesus who don't feel joy, and they feel horrible because of it. They feel guilty, like they've done something immoral, and it's because of, in my opinion, really, really dumb teaching and preaching that tells people they can control how they feel. I don't find that persuasive. They might go, right, David, I hear you, but joy in Galatians 5:12 isn't a feeling. Okay, I disagree with them, but I'm giving you a list of typical things a Christian virtue ethicist would say. Yeah, choosing to focus on certain emotions. Right. 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 It's not negative or bad if you're sad, you're saying, but in general, that Christians are people who focus on more likely to be joyful and so forth. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Even then, I'm with you. I wouldn't call that having the virtue of joy. I would call that something else. The virtue of being open minded to experiencing joy. Yeah. Some people get in the rut of Well, that's a long. Yeah. Yeah. Some people are just sad. Some people are just depressed. Some people choose to focus on the negative because they're pessimists, because it brings them attention or it feels good. And I would say that's not a virtue, that's a vice. But I say that very nuanced because there are people who struggle with that. They're like, well, I don't mean to. I know you don't mean to. I'm not talking to people who don't mean to, but there are people who do mean to. And that's different. Yeah. But these are just some. I mean, you can go on a long list of everything Jesus taught and everything he did and say, those are all the habits you're supposed to do. So if I go out in the world and I say, what am I supposed to do right now? They would say, what inculcates virtuous character? Should I help the homeless person right now? But if you help them, it'll enable them to go get drunk. You're supposed to follow a rule. They'll say, no, do I generate more generosity? Does it shape my character to give right now? And if it does, do it. If it doesn't, don't do it. Yeah. Right. Uh huh. Mm-hmm. 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 Right. So in Matthew 6, you're quoting Jesus when he says, yeah, don't pray so that your words or that you're seen as pious. And when you give, don't give so that you're giving praise, but do so in secret. And so that's right. So you say, is that an example of virtue ethics? Probably so. Yeah. Person probably make the argument. I mean, a deontologist might say, no, it's not about my virtues because Jesus says don't do it. And that's what a lot of people do. That they'll do the same thing. They'll make rules out of everything he ever said. A deontologist again. They look for duties all the time. They don't care about context. But a virtue ethic says no, it is. Am I at a four-way stop in the middle of the cornfields and no one's around? Do I have to stop? A deontologist says yes, you do. That's the rule. A virtue ethicist might say, does it help me form responsibility in obedience to the law? Yes, I need to stop. A consequentialist will say, no, you don't. You're not going to hurt anybody if you run this stop sign. In fact, you'll help more people if you get to the party early. You can serve. And a deontologist say you broke the rules. That was immoral. A virtue ethics might say you're immoral too, because you disobeyed, and now you're more likely to be a rebel, and rebel is vice. Well, real quickly, there are things we call cardinal virtues, like the big dogs. And historically, these are what they are, historically. In the ancient world, Plato, Aristotle, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, so these are ancient Greek and Roman philosophers, they came to a consensus, or the basic virtues. And this is in the ancient world, if you do time travel, is if you walked around the street, probably the everyday person believed these are the big dogs. This is what it means to be a virtuous person. You have wisdom, or they would say, we translate it prudence. You would have wisdom, courage, justice, temperance, and self control. Those are the biggies, the big five. So to be a virtuous person is to be wise, courageous, just, that is fair, and temperance and self control are similar. Temperance, no, actually four. I said five. I meant four. I'm sorry. You can say temperance or self. That's the same thing. Sorry, I meant to say four, not five. So wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. Wouldn't use the word temperance much anymore. In America, temperance typically associated with alcohol, but that's not what they meant. They meant self-control. They want to come back next week and wrap this up. But then there are Christian cardinal virtues, and we'll wrap those up next week. But those are our main cardinal virtues. So think on such things. Be a virtuous person, maybe, or go save a bunch of people. I don't know. Whatever you want, Bonnie. Let's just be like Jack. That's the whole takeaway from today. I want to be, I want to be, I want to. Be like Jesus, him too, yes. Other J word. God bless you. See you next week and see you in a few.